The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. It had been like this since Alina left. Not truly left, of course, but gone. Vanished. The way a candle flame simply ceases to be, leaving only a wisp of smoke and a lingering scent of beeswax. I could still smell her perfume sometimes, a phantom violetan sandalwood that would catch me off guard in the grocery aisle, or when I turned over in bed, reaching for the warmth that wasn't there. I tried to work. My desk, once a monument to organized chaos, became a barren landscape of untouched documents. The colleagues, they meant well. Their hushed tones, the averted gazes, the clumsy offers of casseroles I never ate. Each gesture, no matter how kind, felt like a fresh incision. I couldn't bear the pity, the way their eyes held that knowing sadness. It was a mirror reflecting my own hollowed-out self. Then the solicitor called, a crisp, formal voice detailing the unexpected inheritance, my estranged grandmother's house. A manor, he called it. Remote, forgotten, tucked away in some nameless pocket of the countryside. It was a lifeline, or perhaps a convenient escape hatch. A place where the silence would be natural, not a deafening reminder of what I'd lost. I needed to breathe air that hadn't been shared with anyone else, air that didn't carry the ghost of her laughter. The decision was swift, almost reckless. I packed a single suitcase, leaving behind the ghost-filled apartment, the half-finished projects, the life I'd shared with Alina. The old house, the manor, it promised nothing but solitude, and that, I realized, was exactly what I craved. The drive was long, the asphalt ribbons slowly unraveling into a winding dirt track. The sky, a bruised purple, mirrored my mood. Fields stretched out, brown and desolate, giving way to dense, ancient woods that swallowed the light. The further I drove, the more the world seemed to recede, peeling away like old wallpaper. My phone's signal died somewhere after the last struggling general store, leaving me with only the hum of the engine and the growing quiet of the wilderness. It was exactly what I wanted. I told myself that, again and again. When the manor finally materialized through a break in the gnarled trees, it was less grand, more imposing than I'd imagined. Turrets jutted like broken teeth, and the intricate gingerbread trim was rotting, peeling away in strips. The grounds were a tangle of overgrown roses and skeletal bushes, choked by weeds that reached for the sky like grasping fingers. A sense of history, heavy and suffocating, clung to the air, thick as the dust that must have settled on every surface within. I killed the engine. The sudden quiet was profound, broken only by the distant caw of a crow. My breath plumed white in the crisp autumn air. I sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, the leather cool beneath my clammy palms. There was no welcoming light, no sign of life, just the house waiting. It looked nothing like the glossy, filtered photos I'd found online, a bizarre listing I'd stumbled across while researching the property in Airbnb rural area. Reviews don't match reality. Those reviews had spoken of quaint charm and rustic beauty. What I saw was a monument to decay. Stepping out, the gravel crunched under my boots, a harsh sound in the stillness. It carried a scent I couldn't quite place, something earthy, like damp soil and forgotten wood, but with an undercurrent of something metallic, almost coppery. My hand trembled slightly as I pushed open the heavy oak door. It groaned in protest, a long, drawn-out sigh that seemed to echo through the entire structure. When the single overhead bulb flickered to life, it cast a sickly yellow glow, revealing a cavernous foyer. Dust motes danced in the weak light, thick as snow. The air was frigid, despite the lingering warmth of the afternoon sun outside. I ran a hand along a heavy velvet curtain, the fabric stiff with age and grime, shedding a fine powder of dust. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the floor beneath my feet. I moved into what looked like a drawing room, or perhaps a parlor. It was impossible to tell, choked as it was with sheet-draped furniture, like an assembly of forgotten ghosts. I could feel my own breath, shallow and ragged, in the vast, empty space. A sensation pricked at the back of my neck, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, as if something had just moved in the periphery of my vision, something that didn't belong to the dust or the decaying grandeur. Or was there something else here, something that had waited for me to arrive, vanished? I could still smell her sometimes, a phantom whisper of jasmine and linen, just beyond the reach of my senses. I had to move. Sitting in the gloom of the great hall, the last sliver of afternoon light bleeding through the grimy panes, was a slow drowning. This house, my grandmother's house, inherited, a grand, decaying monument to forgotten lives. It felt less like a home and more like an Airbnb rural area. Reviews don't match reality, promising rustic charm, but delivering only dust, creaks, and a profound sense of abandonment. Every surface was filmed with a fine grey powder, undisturbed for decades. The air itself was thick, smelling of old paper, damp earth, and something metallic, like stale blood or rust. I pushed myself up from the worn velvet armchair, my joints protesting with a dull ache. The floorboards groaned beneath my weight, a symphony of complaint that echoed through the empty spaces. I began to wander. My footsteps were loud, intrusive, breaking the fragile quiet. I traced the perimeter of the hall, my fingers brushing against the cold, peeling wallpaper. A faded floral pattern, green and gold, now obscured by generations of grime. Portraits lined the walls, their eyes following me with a silent, judging intensity. Ancestors, no doubt. Faces I didn't recognize, some stern, some with an unsettling glint in their eyes that seemed to pierce through the canvas. A box, a book, just a prickle on my skin. The kitchen was a cavern of disuse. Faint scent of something sweet, almost sickly, lingered in the air, battling with the pervasive mustiness. I found a pantry, its door ajar, revealing rows of empty jars, a single shriveled apple on a forgotten shelf. A gust of wind rattled the windows, and for a moment the light in the kitchen flickered, a brief stutter before returning to its dim, consistent glow. Old wiring, I told myself, a house this age. Nothing more. My eyes were playing tricks on me in the fading light. The stairs groaned under each step, each creak a tiny explosion in the stillness. The landing was a gallery of closed doors. I opened one at random, a bedroom clearly. A four-poster bed draped in dusty white sheets, like a ghost waiting to manifest. I ran a hand over the polished wood of the dresser, leaving a clean streak in the dust. My fingers brushed against something hard, tucked beneath a stack of yellowed linens. Photographs. A small, wooden box, barely larger than my palm. Inside, a collection of sepia-toned images. Children with serious faces, women in heavy dresses, men with handlebar mustaches. My grandmother was there, younger, her stern gaze already present. And then a picture that made me pause, a group shot, perhaps a family gathering. Tall, slender, almost too tall, with eyes that seemed to gleam even in the faded print. Not quite right. The face was indistinct, blurred, as if it had moved just as the shutter clicked, or perhaps it was just a smudge on the old photograph. My vision wasn't what it used to be. I closed the box, a tremor running through my hand. I looked around, searching for a draft, a broken window pane, anything to explain the sudden drop in temperature. Nothing. The curtains hung heavy, undisturbed. The window was shut tight. It was just an old house settling. Drafts found their way in. I moved on, opening more doors. A study, filled with towering bookshelves, the spines of the books crumbling. A child's nursery, with a rocking horse covered in a sheet, looking like a small, shrouded corpse. Each room held its own layer of decay, its own forgotten story. In what must have been the master bedroom, a grand space with a large, ornate fireplace, I noticed a subtle depression in the worn rug near the hearth. Curious, I knelt, brushing away decades of dust. Beneath the rug, the floorboards were slightly uneven. I pressed down. One gave way with a soft click. My fingers found a hidden latch. With a grunt, I lifted the section of flooring. It looked ancient, almost medieval. The brass was etched with intricate, swirling patterns that seemed to writhe in the dim light. A heavy, rusted padlock secured the lid. No key, of course not. A sharp, metallic smell emanated from the chest, mingling with the old paper scent of the house. As I ran my fingers over the cold metal of the lock, a faint whisper brushed against my ear. It was indistinct, like dry leaves skittering across pavement or sand shifting in the wind. Almost a voice, but not quite. Just sound. My breath hitched. I froze, head cocked, listening. The house was utterly silent again, save for the rhythmic thud of my own blood in my ears. Was it the wind, a draft? The house settling as old houses do? Or was it something else, something I couldn't quite grasp? A secret the house was trying to murmur into my grieving ear. Vanished. I could still smell it sometimes, the beeswax, or was it her perfume? A faint, elusive sweetness, like jasmine clinging to the old, damp stone of the manor walls. I turned my head sharply, convinced he was just behind me, a breath away, her hand reaching for my arm. Nothing, just the cold, still air. My vision blurred. Tiredness, I told myself. Grief. The mind plays tricks. I tried to focus, to pull myself back from the edge of that familiar abyss. I found myself staring at the laptop screen, the bright glow a harsh contrast to the perpetual twilight of the manor's study. I'd been scrolling through listings, a mindless escape, some part of me still clinging to the idea of a fresh start that didn't involve decaying ancestral homes. One particular listing had snagged my attention. An airbnb in rural area. Reviews don't match reality. The pictures showed a quaint cottage, sun-drenched rooms, a garden bursting with color. A charming getaway, one review chirped. Peaceful retreat exactly as described, another declared. My fingers tightened on the mouse. Peaceful. The word felt alien, a relic from a forgotten language. I remembered reading those reviews before, weeks ago, when I was still trying to decide where to go after. They seemed so convincing then. Now, looking at the faded photographs of the manor, the peeling wallpaper, the dust motes dancing in the meager light, I wondered if I'd even know peace if it slapped me across the face. Had those reviewers seen the same cottage I had, or was my own perception already too warped to trust? A low hum began, deep in the floorboards, a vibration that tickled my soles, then climbed my legs. My skin prickled. It wasn't the house settling. It felt deliberate. I froze, listening, holding my breath until my lungs ached. My name. William. My blood felt like static electricity buzzing under my skin. Elena. I rasped, the word catching in my throat. The sound of my own voice was too loud, too desperate. I spun around, my gaze sweeping the empty room. The heavy velvet drapes hung motionless. The antique furniture stood silent, disapproving witnesses. My heart hammered, a frantic drum against my ribs. It was the grief, I reasoned, the sheer, crushing weight of it. Sleep deprivation. My mind was simply fracturing under the strain. I grabbed my phone, fingers fumbling. I needed a tether, a voice from the world that still made sense. I called a colleague, a man named Robert, who always spoke in practicalities. "William, you all right, man?" Robert's voice was tinny, distant, laced with that familiar, weary concern. "Yeah, I think so," I said, trying to steady my voice. "Just the house, it's a lot, and I keep hearing things." A pause. Still struggling with Elena, huh? "Look, I get it. It's tough, but you're isolated out there. Get some sleep, eat something decent. Your mind's playing tricks on you. That old place is probably full of drafts and creaks." "It's more than that, Robert." I saw her. Just a flash, but it was her. In the hallway. My voice cracked. Robert sighed, a sound of gentle exasperation. "William, you're exhausted. You're grieving. It's natural. Your brain is trying to process. It's projecting. Come back to the city for a few days. Clear your head." He was right, of course. He had to be. My brain was projecting. It was natural. Robert's dismissiveness, however well-intentioned, only deepened the chasm between my experience and what was considered sane. I walked through the manor, the floorboards groaning under my weight. I reached the landing at the top of the grand staircase, the one Elena had always loved. The light from the moon, thin and sickly, spilled through the tall arched window. And there he was. She stood at the far end of the hall, her back to me. Her hair, the rich auburn I'd run my fingers through countless times, fell over her shoulders. The delicate lace of her favorite shawl, a deep emerald green, draped across her. I took a step forward. She turned slowly. My breath hitched. Her face was pale, translucent almost, but her eyes, those beautiful, intelligent eyes, fixed on me. A faint, sad smile touched his lips. "William," he murmured, his voice like rustling leaves, soft and ethereal. "You came back." My legs felt like lead, yet I took another step, then another. This wasn't grief. This wasn't sleep deprivation. This was her, or a perfect replica. I reached out a trembling hand. "Elena, my love, how?" Before I could finish, the smile widened, stretching too far, distorting her features. The scent of jasmine vanished, replaced by something metallic, like old blood and damp earth. Her hand, which had been reaching for mine, shifted. Her fingers elongated, twisting, becoming thin, pale talons that scraped against the air. The emerald shawl rippled, not with the grace of fabric, but with a sudden, unnatural undulation, as if something vast and unseen was stirring beneath it. My heart seized. This wasn't Alina. This was a mockery, a cruel, impossible trick. I stumbled backward, a guttural sound tearing from my throat. The smile on her face, or its face, tightened. Her head tilted, an impossible angle, and a sound, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, emanated from her. It was a chorus of echoes, layered and dissonant, yet still undeniably her, just like the others. The thing that wore her face took another step towards me, its movements jerky, unnatural. The air grew heavy, suffocating. There was this what the others felt. There was this how it began for them too. The thing that wore her face had retreated, or perhaps I had. I wasn't sure. My memory of the past few minutes was a fractured mosaic of terror, the lurching advance, the cold dread, the sensation of something trying to pry open the delicate architecture of my skull. I was slumped against the cold stone of the hallway, my breath ragged, tasting like ash. My hands trembled, not with cold, but with a deep internal vibration. My muscles ached, taut from an unseen strain. I had tried to leave, hadn't I? I'd booked an Airbnb in rural area. Reviews don't match reality. A small, unassuming cottage miles from here, boasting serene tranquility and rustic charm. The floorboards creaked with phantom footsteps that weren't mine. The air in the empty rooms felt heavy, pregnant with expectation. The silence was never truly silent. It hummed with an unseen presence, a low thrum that vibrated in my teeth. The reviews promised escape, but it offered only a different kind of cage. No, running wasn't the answer. I had to face it here. My grandmother, she knew, he had to have known. Her reclusive nature, the locked rooms, the distant, almost fearful gaze she'd sometimes cast in my direction during our rare, awkward visits as a child. It all clicked into place, a grim, late-blooming understanding. I pushed myself up, my legs protesting, and began to move, not away from the house's heart, but deeper into its forgotten corners. I started in a study, a room I'd mostly avoided, filled with heavy, dust-laden tomes and the cloying scent of aged paper and something metallic, like old pennies. I ran my fingers along its edges, feeling for anything out of place. Nothing. I checked the drawers, pulling them open one by one, revealing only brittle stationery, dried up in quells, and a few yellowed photographs of stern-faced ancestors whose eyes seemed to follow my every move. The walls were lined with towering bookshelves, each shelf crammed tight. I pulled books, one after another, inspecting the spines, the covers, feeling for a hidden latch, a false panel. My fingers grew grimy with dust. A small, dry cough escaped me. The air was thick, stagnant. I paused, listening. The house was quiet, too quiet. The kind of quiet that held its breath, waiting. Then, my fingers grazed something. Not a book, not a shelf. A slight recess in the wood paneling behind a particularly dense collection of theological texts. It was barely perceptible, a hairline crack in the grain, but my nail caught on it. My heart gave a frantic thump. I pressed, pushed, probed. There, a soft click. A section of the paneling about a foot wide slid inward with a faint groan of ancient wood. I pulled it out. No title, no name. Just the raw, unadorned surface. I carried it to the desk, brushing away a layer of dust with my sleeve, and opened it. The pages were filled with a spidery, looping script I vaguely recognized as my grandmother's. The ink was faded in places, almost illegible, but the words, even fragmented, hit me like a physical blow. They tell me it's grief, the loneliness, but I know, I hear them. This wasn't just a haunting. This was something else. A lineage of sorrow, a burden passed down. A pact, my family. What could she mean? The entries grew increasingly disjointed, the script more erratic, sometimes scrawled diagonally across the page. They want to come through, they need a vessel, and I am weakening. The veil thins, echoes. The words seem to vibrate off the page, resonating with a disturbing familiarity. I could almost hear a faint, distant hum, a low, resonant thrumming that seemed to emanate from the very walls. The mirror shows not my face, but a shifting, hungry thing. Another entry read, barely legible, a frantic, desperate scribble. I gripped the journal tighter, my grip tight. This wasn't just a story. This was a confession, a warning. My grandmother wasn't just reclusive, he was terrified. And he was connected to this, to whatever lurked in the house, to the thing that wore my wife's face. What kind of pact could bind generations? And what did it demand of me? The brittle pages crinkled under my touch, each one exhaling a puff of dust that tickled my nose. The pact, I read, the words a cold whisper in the vast, silent library. My fingers traced the faded ink, following the erratic script that spoke of a desperate bargain, a family's desperate attempt to stave off ruin. It wasn't just about wealth or status, I realized, but something more fundamental, more primal. Protection, sustenance. The text grew increasingly fragmented, jumping from one generation's scrawled entry to the next. Bits and pieces of what sounded like an ancient ritual, cryptic warnings about the feeding, and passages describing the chorale of echoes, not as a metaphor, but as a living, consuming presence. It demanded a host. It demanded memories. It demanded love. A chill, far colder than the ambient temperature of the room, settled into my bones. I continued to turn the brittle pages, skipping over sections that were too faded or too frantic to read, searching for keywords for clarity. The pact, I read, binds the bloodline, a conduit, a vessel. To deny it is to invite the fracturing, the unraveling, the consumption. My breath hitched. This wasn't some abstract threat. It was a direct inheritance, a horrifying legacy. I remembered the odd feeling of being drawn to this place, the strange sense of inevitability that had settled over me since my wife's death. Was it the grief, or something else pulling the strings? I thought of the countless hours I'd spent online, scrolling through listings, desperately seeking an escape. I even remembered a particularly dodgy listing for an Airbnb in rural area. Reviews don't match reality, a rundown cottage with blurry photos and suspiciously glowing comments. I dismissed it then, thinking I deserved better. Now, I knew this manor, with its polished wood and silent halls, was a far more insidious trap. A faint, almost imperceptible tremor ran through the floorboards. The house was always settling, always groaning, but this felt different. It was a vibration that seemed to originate from within the very structure of the building, a low hum that resonated in my teeth. The air in the library grew heavy, thick with a scent I couldn't place: damp earth, dried flowers, and something metallic, like old pennies. My skin prickled. I tried to rationalize it. Old house, drafts, my own overwrought imagination. But the hum intensified, a low thrumming that felt like a heartbeat against the soles of my feet. The pages in my hands began to tremble, a nervous flutter. Then the sound of a whisper. It wasn't the wind. It was a voice, soft and mournful, just at the edge of hearing. William, my name, spoken with a familiarity that twisted my gut. Nothing, just the rows of silent books, the heavy drapes, the dust motes dancing in the slivers of weak afternoon light. I gripped the book tighter, my grip tight. William, don't leave me. The voice was closer now, a fragile echo of him voice, my wife. No, this wasn't real. It couldn't be. This was my grief playing tricks. It was the lack of sleep, the isolation. But the scent of lilies, her favorite, suddenly flooded the air, sharp and cloying. It was so strong. It burned in my nostrils. Then a flicker. In the periphery of my vision by the tall, arched window, a shape, wispy, indistinct, like smoke coalescing against the fading light. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. The shape solidified, slowly, deliberately. It was her, or a grotesque imitation. Her silhouette, slender and familiar, was there, but it shimmered like heat haze off asphalt. Her hair, usually a vibrant auburn, was a dull, lifeless gray, strands floating unnaturally around her head, as if submerged in water. Her face turned towards me. My breath caught. Her lips, usually curved into a gentle smile, were drawn back in a rictus of agony, revealing teeth that were too long, too sharp. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. The air grew frigid, biting at my exposed skin. This wasn't a memory. This wasn't a hallucination born of sorrow. This was a violation, a mockery. The entity was here. It was using her. It was using my pain. Her skeletal hand, adorned with the faint gleam of our wedding ring, lifted slowly. Her fingers, elongated and thin, began to curl, beckoning. His head tilted, a macabre parody of affection. "Come, William, join me." My vision blurred at the edges. I could hear the frantic drumming of my own blood in my ears. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee, to obliterate the image from my mind, but my feet felt rooted to the floorboards. This wasn't just a threat to my sanity. This was a direct, personal assault. It knew what hurt me most. It was here in this room, twisting the most beautiful memory into a grotesque weapon. The distorted figure took a step forward, the tattered hem of the dress dragging silently across the floor. The stench of lilies, now mixed with something acrid and metallic, intensified, making my stomach churn. I felt a pressure in my chest, a crushing weight that made it impossible to breathe. There was it trying to pull me in. There was this its way of consuming love and memories. My mind raced, trying to comprehend the sheer malevolent audacity of it. The figure took another step, then another, closing the distance between us. The air around it seemed to warp, shimmering and distorting the bookshelves behind it. I finally found my voice, a strangled, desperate cry. No, the sound seemed to shatter the fragile illusion. The figure paused, its head cocked at an unnatural angle. A low, wet chuckle emanated from its throat, a sound that promised unending torment. Then, as quickly as it had appeared, it began to unravel. I stood there, trembling, clutching the ancient book, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The library was silent once more, save for the frantic thumping of my own heart. It was gone. But the image was seared into my mind, the sound of her voice, twisted and vile, still ringing in my ears. It had come for me. It had used her. What else was it capable of? And what did it want me to do? The shimmering form wavered, blurred, and then dissolved into the dust motes dancing in the weak light filtering through the grimy window. It simply wasn't there. One moment, a twisted mockery of a human shape. The next, nothing but the stale air of the library and the dull throb behind my eyes. I stood frozen, my breath catching in my throat, a ragged sound. My hands were shaking so violently I had to clench them into fists, pressing the grip tight against my thighs. My chest ached. Was I seeing things? Had the grief finally fractured something fundamental inside me? I stumbled backward, bumping against a heavy, oak-paneled desk. The impact jarred my teeth. The scent of aged paper and mildew clung to the air, suddenly suffocating. I needed answers, not just for this phantom, but for everything. The whispers, the shifting shadows, the way the house seemed to breathe around me. My wife's memory, once a beacon, now felt like a lure, drawing me deeper into this crumbling edifice, this trap. I spent the next few hours in a feverish scramble, fueled by a terrifying clarity. The fear was a cold, sharp thing in my gut, but it sharpened my focus too. I started with the library, pulling down every brittle-spined book, every yellowed journal. My grandmother, I remembered, had been a collector of oddities, a hoarder of histories, both factual and folkloric. Dust motes danced in the anemic lamplight as I sifted through stacks of local gazettes from the turn of the century, hand-bound pamphlets on regional superstitions, and surprisingly, several thick, leather-bound family ledgers. The internet connection here was predictably atrocious. Pages loaded with agonizing slowness, often failing altogether. Still, I persevered, searching for anything anomalous in the local county records. Disappearances, unexplained deaths, sudden instances of madness. The words I typed were desperate stark. I learned about the town's founding, its lumber mills, its quiet decline. I read about a string of bizarre events that the local paper had dismissed as wilderness fever or seasonal melancholia. There were vague mentions of families uprooted, houses abandoned. A whole section of the local historical society's online archive, when it finally loaded, spoke of a particular patch of woods not far from here that was best left undisturbed. It was always the woods. It preyed on grief, on loss, on the very fabric of identity. The descriptions were inconsistent, fluid, like trying to grasp smoke. Sometimes it was a sound, sometimes a presence, sometimes a flicker in the periphery. But the core remained. It took what you held dearest, leaving nothing but an echo. My stomach twisted. My wife, my memories of her. There was that what it wanted. The family ledgers offered a more intimate and far more disturbing narrative. Generations of my ancestors, listed with meticulous dates of birth and death. But alongside some names, there were unsettling annotations. Lost to the mire, One read beside a name from the late 1800, another right turned, simply individuals whose presence in the records abruptly ceased, without a death date. The Corail. It was a name then, a name for the thing that dissolved into dust. My own family, my blood, was steeped in this. My grandmother in her later years had been eccentric. I remembered the way her eyes would sometimes glaze over, as if she were listening to something only he could hear. I remembered her hushed warnings, dismissed by my parents as the ramblings of an old woman. Warnings about the house, about the woods, about listening too closely. I found a small, unmarked notebook tucked between the pages of a botanical guide, its cover soft with age. Inside, the handwriting was unmistakably my grandmother's, they hunger for the whole. And then, a drawing, a crude, almost childish depiction of the manor, surrounded by swirling, indistinct forms, like smoke given malicious intent. My breath hitched. There was this why I was here. There was I chosen. There was this what my grandmother had known, had feared. I looked up from the notebook, my eyes sweeping the room, now bathed in the pale, indifferent light of dawn. The silence was not empty, it was pregnant with expectation. What did the Corail want with me? And what did it mean to be a host? The house felt alive, not with the comforting creaks of an old structure settling, but with a predatory awareness that prickled the hairs on my neck. The pale dawn light, which should have brought reassurance, instead painted the familiar study in sickly, unfamiliar hues. Dust motes danced in the shafts, each one a tiny, indifferent witness. My breath hitched, a dry catch in my throat. I stood, the forgotten notebook a dead weight in my hand, and turned towards the door. I needed to clear my head, to walk away from the chilling implications of my grandmother's words, from the weight of her unspoken pact. I needed to leave. The mahogany door, heavy and solid, refused to budge. I tried the handle, twisting it hard. It rattled, but the latch held firm. I pulled, I pushed. Nothing. A sudden surge of adrenaline tightened my chest. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prickle at the edges of my composure. I had entered this room only last night, the door swinging freely on its hinges. I remembered the scrape of its bottom edge against the worn rug. Now it was sealed. A faint, sickly, sweet scent, like dried flowers left too long in stagnant water, began to permeate the air. I backed away from the door, my gaze sweeping the room again. The bookshelves seemed to lean in, their rows of forgotten volumes like judging eyes. I tried another door, one I knew led to a small, seldom used corridor. It opened with an unnerving smoothness, no sound at all. I stepped through, my hand still on the knob, pulling it shut behind me. The corridor stretched ahead, long and narrow. I remembered a window at the far end, overlooking the neglected rose garden. I hurried towards it, my footsteps muffled by the threadbare runner. But the corridor kept going. Each step I took seemed to add another yard to its length. The window, which should have been just a few paces away, remained stubbornly distant. The walls, once a faded floral wallpaper, now seemed to ripple, the patterns blurring into abstract, unsettling shapes. My breath plumed in front of me, a ghostly white puff. I stopped, my heart racing, my head spun. This wasn't right. I knew this house. I had explored every nook and cranny as a child, though my grandmother had always steered me away from certain rooms, certain corridors. This one, however, had always been straightforward. I turned back, intending to return to the study, to force the issue with that locked door. But the corridor behind me was gone. Where the door to the study should have been, there was only a seamless wall, papered in the same shifting patterns. My vision swam. I blinked hard, rubbing my eyes, but when I opened them, the wall remained, solid, impenetrable. I was trapped. A low, guttural groan seemed to vibrate through the floorboards beneath my feet. It was deeper, a sound that resonated in my bones, a sound that spoke of immense, unseen pressure. I stumbled forward, blindly choosing a direction, any direction. I needed an exit. I needed out. I passed a door on my left, then another on my right. They weren't there before. I was sure of it. I tried the first one, a plain wooden door with a tarnished brass knob. It opened into what looked like the kitchen pantry, but the shelves were bare, covered in a thick layer of cobwebs, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. I slammed it shut, a shudder running through me. The next door led to a small, empty room with a single, grimy window looking out onto a brick wall. Not the garden, not anything familiar. My mind raced, trying to map the house to find a pattern, but the layout refused to conform. It was a fluid, shifting nightmare. I remembered the cheerful descriptions online, the pristine photos of Airbnb in rural area. Reviews don't match reality. A charming getaway, one guest had written. So peaceful. The lie tasted like ash on my tongue, bitter and suffocating. The reality was a labyrinth designed to break me. I tried calling out, "Hello." It was as if the air itself absorbed the sound. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers trembling. No signal, of course. The isolation was absolute. A sudden, sharp memory flashed through my mind, my wife laughing, her head thrown back, sunlight glinting in her hair. It wasn't a memory, it was a perversion. The entity. It was playing with me, twisting the very fabric of my grief. No, I wouldn't let it. I wouldn't break. My wife deserved more than this house making a mockery of her memory. I forced myself to breathe, to focus. This was a physical space, however distorted. There had to be an exit, a window, anything. I tried every door, every turn, but each path led to another dead end, another unfamiliar room, or back to a place I had just left. The house was a circle, a trap. The air grew heavier, thicker, pressing down on me. How long had I been walking? Minutes? Hours? The light from the non-existent windows remained the same pale, indifferent grey. I found myself back in a narrow, unlit hallway, the air stale and tasting of dust and something metallic. A door, identical to a dozen others I had tried, stood before me. What lay beyond this one? Another dead end, or something far worse? The dust motes danced in the sickly morning light, a swirling, silent ballet that seemed to mark the stillness of the room. My breath hitched, a shallow, rattling sound in the quiet study. The air itself felt thick, not just with age and neglect, but with something else, a palpable pressure like standing at the bottom of a deep, dark well. My skin crawled, 1,000 tiny insects tracing phantom paths across my arms. I shivered, though the room held a damp, cloying warmth. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself it was just a draft, just the lingering chill of a sleepless night. But the house, it hummed, a low, resonant thrum that vibrated in my teeth, a sound I hadn't noticed before, yet now it was everywhere, beneath everything. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the old pipes. It was deeper, more fundamental. My gaze drifted back to the papers scattered across the heavy oak desk, my grandmother's journals, stacks of brittle letters, an elaborate hand-drawn family tree that looked less like a lineage and more like a twisted root system. Each entry, each cryptic note, was a piece of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving, a puzzle I now desperately wished I could unsee. It wasn't a journal, but a collection of sparse, unnerving entries, each dated generations apart. From what and to what? My stomach clenched. This wasn't just a family history, it was a confession. I remembered the brief flicker of hope I'd harbored when I first inherited this place. I'd even considered an Airbnb in rural area. Reviews don't match reality for a while, a safe, mundane escape from my grief. But this house, it was a far cry from quaint. It was a trap. I picked up another document, a fragile parchment yellowed with age, tucked between the pages of a forgotten almanac. It was a crude drawing, almost a child's sketch, yet disturbingly precise. And at the heart of the tree, a human figure, its limbs splayed, its mouth open in a silent scream. Above it, an ornate, swirling symbol, one I'd seen etched into the floor of the hidden chamber, and again in the faded tattoo on my grandmother's forearm in an old photograph. The chorale of echoes. My eyes darted to the family tree, tracing the lines with a trembling finger. Each name was there, a branch on that terrible tree. And every few generations, a name was circled, underlined, sometimes even highlighted with a faint, almost invisible red ink. The dates of these circled names corresponded disturbingly with the dates in the leather-bound volume. 1788, 1852, 1921. And then a gap, until my own name, William, circled, underlined. The air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. My throat constricted. It wasn't just my name, it was the date beneath it. The current year, my arrival, my inheritance, my wife's death. It all snapped into place with a sickening click. The pact, an ancient agreement made by my distant ancestors, not for power, not entirely. It was a desperate bargain, a desperate plea to escape something worse, something they called the consuming maw, a horror so profound they willingly offered up their own flesh and blood to divert it. A sacrifice, every few generations, a designated inheritor, an anchor. I wasn't just a victim of this house. I was its intended purpose. I was not meant to escape. I was meant to host. My hands shook so violently I dropped the parchment, its dry rustle sounding like a death rattle. My vision blurred. My head pounded, a dull, insistent throb that mirrored the house's low hum. The entity. It wasn't just feeding on grief, on memories. It was waiting for me. My breath came in ragged gasps. My chest felt tight, as if a great weight had settled upon it. My legs felt weak, threatening to buckle. I tried to stand, to back away from the desk, from the terrible truth staring up at me from the papers, but my muscles refused to obey. I was rooted there, a living sacrifice already bound to the altar. They spoke my name, stretched it, twisted it into something grotesque and alien. They promised release, understanding, an end to my pain. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing the heels of my hands into my temples, trying to block out the sounds, the knowledge. I was the designated inheritor, the anchor, and the entity was hungry. How long had it been waiting for me specifically? The red line pulsed. A slow, rhythmic throb beneath my own name under the date, my arrival, my inheritance, my wife. The thought, sharp as glass, splintered the fragile calm I'd tried to construct. This wasn't a family history, it was a death warrant. Mine. A cold certainty, heavier than any fear I'd felt before, settled in my gut. I had to leave. Now, every nerve screamed for escape. My hands trembled as I snatched the car keys from the mantelpiece, the heavy brass cold against my palm. I didn't bother with a bag, didn't even glance at the phone lying inert on the table. There was no time. Just a desperate, primal urge to put distance between myself and this house, this malevolent weight that clung to my very breath. I burst through the front door, the wood groaning a protest that sounded too much like a sigh. The air outside bit at my exposed skin, sharp and clean, momentarily clearing the suffocating fog from my lungs. A sliver of hope, fragile as a spiderweb, stretched across the vast, empty sky. The gravel crunched under my boots as I ran, stumbling slightly in my haste. My car, just a few yards away, parked where I'd left it, a familiar silver beacon in the encroaching twilight. I reached the driver's side, fumbling with the key. My fingers, numb with adrenaline, struggled to find the lock. Finally, the satisfying click. I yanked the door open, the interior smelling faintly of stale coffee and something else, something metallic, almost like old pennies. I slid into the seat, my breath hitching, and jammed the key into the ignition. Turn, nothing. I tried again and again. The engine whined, a pathetic, dying gasp that offered no promise of life. I slammed my fist against the steering wheel, the horn blaring a short, choked cry into the stillness. The sound felt wrong, too loud, too desperate. I looked up through the windshield and saw it, the house. Its windows, like vacant eyes, watched me, but something was off. The lines seemed to waver, the angles shifting almost imperceptibly. Was it the fading light, my strained vision, or was the house itself? Breathing. No, I wouldn't let it. I wouldn't be trapped. My car was useless. My legs weren't. I scrambled out, leaving the door ajar, and started running. Not towards the house, but away from it, down the long, winding dirt track that led to the main road. The one I'd driven in on. The one that promised escape. The trees, thick and ancient, pressed in on either side of the track, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching for me. I could hear the rustle of leaves, but it wasn't just wind. My breath rasped in my throat, a raw, burning sensation. I focused on the path ahead, willing myself faster. The road should have been familiar, a straight shot to the paved county highway, but it wasn't. The turns felt sharper, the dips deeper. The track itself seemed to narrow, the trees growing closer, their gnarled roots snaking across my path like tripwires. I stumbled, catching myself before I fell. I was running, but the landscape felt static, like a dream where I run and run but never move. I risked a glance behind me. The house, impassably, was closer, or perhaps the track had curved back on itself subtly, without my noticing. My mind reeled. The air grew thick, heavy, pressing down on me. I picked up my pace, a frantic, desperate sprint. My lungs burned. My legs screamed, but the house, it kept reappearing. It was a trick, a cruel, impassable trick. Then the ground beneath my feet became uneven. Not just roots, but a sudden, violent buckling. It threw me off balance. I windmilled my arms, trying to regain my footing, but the earth itself seemed to heave, rising and falling like a monstrous chest. A guttural roar, deep and resonant, vibrated through the soles of my boots. It wasn't the wind. It was a sound that came from everywhere and nowhere, a sound that twisted the very fabric of the air. I fell hard, my knees scraping against sharp stones, a jolt of pain shooting up my spine. The impact rattled my teeth. Before I could even push myself up, a sudden, immense pressure slammed into my back. It wasn't a physical blow, not a hand or a branch, but a force. An invisible wall of crushing weight that drove the air from my lungs. I gasped, struggling for breath, my vision blurring at the edges. It was dragging me, pulling me, backward. My nails tore, dirt packing beneath them, but the force was relentless, inexorable. It lifted me, twisted me, my limbs flailing uselessly against its unseen grip. The world spun. The house, a gaping maw, rushed towards me, a sickening lurch, a sharp crack against my temple. Then I was airborne for a terrifying, weightless moment before I slammed into something solid and unyielding. The impact stole my breath completely. My head throbbed, a dull, insistent ache. Slowly, painfully, I pushed myself onto my elbows. My vision swam. The air was thick with the familiar scent of old wood and decay. The silence was absolute, broken only by my own ragged gasps. I looked around, my eyes adjusting to the dim light. I was back inside, the front hall. The heavy oak door, which I had left wide open in my panicked flight, was now closed, sealed. The air was heavy, stagnant, as if the house had swallowed me whole. A dull ache bloomed in my chest, more than just physical pain. It was the heavy, crushing weight of utter, inescapable defeat. What was this place? What was it doing to me? And if I couldn't escape the very ground beneath my feet, what hope did I have of ever truly leaving this urban rural area? Reviews don't match reality. The red line on the journal page, beneath my name, beneath the date, still pulsed in my mind's eye, even though the journal itself lay closed, face down on the scarred pine table. I'd fled the manor, a desperate, illogical scramble for any semblance of distance. This place, this urban rural area, reviews don't match reality, had promised quiet. The photos online showed sun-drenched rooms, crisp white sheets, a view of rolling fields. What I found was a squat, damp bungalow clinging to the side of a forgotten dirt track, its windows opaque with grime, its furniture smelling of old cigarettes and desperation. The reviews must have been forged, or perhaps, like everything else, my perception was simply wrong. The air here was thick, not with the ancient chill of the manor, but with a stale, lived-in warmth that clung to my skin like a shroud. I hadn't slept, not properly. Every shadow held a flicker, every creak of the cheap laminate floorboards was a footstep. My own ragged breathing seemed to echo, amplified in the small, cramped rooms. I felt the pressure behind my eyes, a dull ache that throbbed in time with the phantom red line. It wasn't just a death warrant, it was an invitation, an open door, and I was standing on the threshold. I'd brought the most damning of the journals with me, a leather-bound monstrosity filled with my grandmother's frantic scrawl and even older, spidery hands that predated her. The pages were brittle, flaking, smelling of mildew and something else. Something metallic, like old blood, or perhaps just the faint tang of iron from the cheap kettle boiling endlessly on the counter. I'd pored over them, again and again, the same passages, the same warnings, until the words blurred into meaningless shapes. But then a phrase, half obscured by a coffee stain, would leap out, sharp and clear. It does not merely take, my grandmother had written, her hand shaking even on the page. It becomes. It seeks not merely a vessel, but a mind, to anchor, to bloom, to know itself through another's perception, the chorale of echoes. It sings, yes, but it needs a throat, a tongue, a brain to form the words, to make the song real. The words clicked into place with a horrifying finality. It wasn't just about consuming my life, my body. It wanted my mind, my memories, my grief. It wanted to wear my thoughts, inhabit my very consciousness like a twisted living puppet, To be a passenger in my own skull, watching as it saw through my eyes, spoke through my mouth, felt with my hands. That was a fate worse than any death. It was an erasure, a total annihilation. My hands, slick with sweat, fumbled through the pages, desperate for more. There had to be an answer, a way out. My grandmother, for all her madness, had fought. She hadn't just succumbed. And there, buried in a section I dismissed as rambling nonsense about warding and cleansing, was a series of symbols, crude drawings of interlocking circles and sharp angles, accompanied by a list of items. Not just any items, personal items. Things imbued with memory, with emotion. A lock of hair, a dried flower from a wedding bouquet, a specific shard of broken glass, and a mirror. A true mirror, not one that merely reflected, but one that held an image. A family heirloom specifically mentioned. I shivered despite the stuffy warmth. The symbols seemed to pulse faintly, just like the red line. It was a ritual, a countermeasure, a desperate gambit. It spoke of severing, of a temporary expulsion, but at a cost, a terrible cost. The self must be offered. One line read, almost too faint to decipher, to shadow the reflection, to deny the anchor its purchase. A sacrifice, not of blood, not of life, but of something deeper, something within me. Was it a memory, a part of my soul? The thought sent a fresh wave of nausea through me, but beneath it, a sliver of desperate resolve hardened. I was tired of being hunted. If it wanted my mind, it would have to fight for it. Every last shard. I needed the mirror, the specific mirror from the manor, the one in the master bedroom, the one that had shown me things that weren't there, or perhaps things that were. It was a true mirror, all right, and the other items. I started making a list on a crumpled napkin, my hands surprisingly steady. The lock of hair, the dried flower. I knew exactly where they were, kept safe, or so I thought, safe from everything but this. A sudden, sharp crack from the corner of the room made me jump, spinning around. Nothing, just the cheap particle board dresser settling, or was it? Had something moved in the periphery, a fleeting glimpse of what? I gripped the journal tighter, its brittle pages threatening to tear. I had to go back to the manor, back to the source. The Airbnb rural area, reviews don't match reality, was no sanctuary. It was just another cage. And I had found the key, or perhaps the trigger for the lock. But what would happen when I offered the self? What exactly would be left of me, if anything, after denying the anchor its purchase? The whisper, that insidious, formless breath that had haunted my waking hours and stolen my sleep, now felt like a goad, a challenge. I was done cowering, done listening. My hands, calloused from years of forgotten work, now felt firm, resolute. A strange, cold calm had settled over me, a fragile shell around the tempest of my grief. I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do, but I knew I had to meet it, to face it. The air grew heavy with a scent. I couldn't quite place damp earth, decaying roses, and something metallic, like old blood. I descended into the grand hall, the heart of this decaying labyrinth, the place where the entity's presence felt strongest, most demanding. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight, piercing the grimy windows, creating an illusion of life in a room that felt utterly dead. I stopped in the center of the hall, my breath shallow, the silence stretched, taut and expectant. I could feel it watching, waiting. My skin prickled. A low thrum began, not a sound I heard with my ears, but a vibration in my bones, a deep resonance that seemed to emanate from the very floorboards beneath my feet. The ancestral portraits lining the walls seemed to shift, their painted eyes following me, their expressions twisting into silent accusations. Then the world began to unravel. The intricate wallpaper, faded damask patterns, shimmered, rippled, and then, impassably, peeled away to reveal a garish floral print. The heavy oak mantelpiece above the fireplace shrunk, simplifying, becoming a cheap, white-painted shelf. My eyes darted around, disoriented. The towering, leaded windows became smaller, framed in stark, white vinyl. The scent of decay was suddenly overlaid with something cloying and artificial stale air freshener, a hint of cheap disinfectant. This wasn't my grandmother's manor. This was an Airbnb in rural area. Reviews don't match reality. I could almost hear the low hum of the refrigerator, the faint static of a television left on standby. A framed print of a generic waterfall hung askew on the wall where a portrait of a stern, forgotten ancestor once reigned. It was all wrong. Horribly wrong. Yet it was undeniably there. The reality of the manor was being peeled away, replaced by this bland, unsettling imitation. They weren't directed at me, but around me, snippets of disembodied conversations. Cozy enough, but the heating was unreliable. The smell was a bit odd, but charming in its way. The host was unresponsive after check-in. Each word was a tiny barb, twisting the knife of my disorientation. This wasn't just a place. It was a memory of a place, a warped echo. A figure flickered into existence at the periphery of my vision, leaning against the cheap mantelpiece. It was her, my wife. She wore the blue dress I loved, the one she wore on our anniversary. Her hair, usually vibrant, was dull, lifeless, hanging in limp strands. This was its game, to twist my grief, to use her image against me. My hands clenched into fists, nails digging into my palms. This wasn't her. It couldn't be. Now it was manifesting it. The air grew heavy, thick like sludge. Breathing became a conscious effort, my lungs burning with each shallow gasp. The chorale of echoes was no longer just a name. It was a tangible force, pressing in on me from all sides, trying to crush me, to drown me in its boundless sorrow. The waterfall print on the wall began to weep, not water, but black, viscous fluid that stained the floral wallpaper. The electric heater hummed louder, its faux flames flickering wildly, then turning a sickly green. The room pulsed, expanding and contracting, the cheap walls breathing. I could feel my own memories being tugged, stretched thin like taffy by unseen hands. Broken, a host. My legs threatened to give out. My head swam. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the visual assault, but the internal chaos only intensified. The smell of decaying roses was back, mingling with the artificial scent of the airbomb, and now something sharp, like ozone after a lightning strike. My ears rang with the sheer pressure of the entity's presence. I opened my eyes. The room was tearing itself apart. The floral wallpaper ripped away, revealing the original damask beneath, only for it to be instantly replaced by a peeling, yellowed paint. The waterfall print morphed into a crude drawing of a stick figure, then a child's scrawl, then back to the waterfall, each transition jarring, violent. I had to fight it, but how? What was real? What was its illusion? Was I already lost inside this manufactured reality? This airbomb in rural area, reviews don't match reality that was twisting itself into my very soul. The sharp, metallic tang of ozone in the air scraped at the back of my throat, mixing with the cloying sweetness of decaying roses and the synthetic pine sent from a plug-in air freshener. The walls of the airbomb in rural area, reviews don't match reality, seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with a silent, rhythmic pulse that made my stomach churn. My legs were not my own. Head swam, not with dizziness, but with a profound sense of unreality. The whispers were not sounds, not really. They were impressions, brushing against the inside of my skull like dry leaves skittering across a forgotten pavement. Fragments of voices, none distinct, all familiar and alien at once. A child's laugh, a mother's sigh, a lover's promise. They were echoes, a cacophony of forgotten lives, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that they were it. It was here. It was everywhere. I opened my eyes. The room had shifted. The cheap landscape print on the wall now depicted a swirling, indistinct vortex of grey and purple. The beige carpet seemed to ripple, like water under a frantic wind. My breath hitched. This wasn't a trick of the light. This was a tearing, a rending of the world I thought I knew, revealing the raw, exposed nerves of a deeper, older reality beneath. A pressure built behind my eyes, as if my very thoughts were being squeezed, flattened. It wanted in. It wanted me. Not just my body, but the sum of my experiences, my grief, my love, my fears. No, my wife. This thing had taken her, or at least twisted her memory, used her absence as a key to unlock my defenses. It would not have me. I would not become another forgotten note in its endless song. I could feel the tremor running through my arms, but it wasn't fear, not entirely. It was adrenaline, a desperate, primal will to survive, to fight. I pushed back against the mental probing, a sheer act of will against an incomprehensible force. It was like trying to stop a tidal wave with my bare hands, but I pushed anyway. Give yourself. I stumbled forward, my knees threatening to buckle, but I forced myself to stay upright. My gaze swept across the room, trying to find an anchor, something real, The plastic sheen of the rental furniture, the too bright overhead light, the faint scent of stale coffee from the kitchen. None of it held. It was all a facade, thin and brittle. I knew what it craved. It didn't just want memories, it wanted the intensity of them. The raw, open wound of grief, the soaring heights of love, the sharp sting of regret. And the most potent, the most vibrant, the most living memory I possessed was her. They were precious. They were mine. And that's when I understood. The pact. Not just a promise of lineage, but a reciprocal exchange. To deny it, to banish it, I had to give it something it couldn't consume, something it would choke on. A conscious, deliberate sacrifice. Not a memory taken, but a memory offered, ripped from myself, denied to its purpose. A phantom image of her face, smiling, appeared in the shimmering air before me, translucent and beautiful. The entity was baiting me, showing me what it wanted to devour. I reached for the core of that memory, the very essence of my love, my grief, the raw pain of her loss. It was a burning ember in my chest, a constant, aching presence. This was what the corail of echoes sought to consume, to twist into its own. But what if I offered it something else? Something from that memory, but not the memory itself. A fragment, a shard. And with a strength I didn't know I possessed, I plunged it into that burning ember. Not to extinguish it, but to sever it. To cut away the connection between the memory and the grief, to separate the love from the pain. To give it the feeling without the person. A scream, not my own, but 1,000 voices intertwined, tore through the room. It was a shriek of pure agony, of thwarted hunger. The walls bucked. The floor heaved. The air grew impassably dense, then impassably thin. I felt a tearing sensation inside my chest, a profound wrenching. It was like pulling a root from deep, wet earth. A part of me, a fundamental piece of my emotional landscape, was ripped away. The phantom image of her face shattered like glass, dissolving into 1,000 glittering dust motes that vanished into the swirling gray. The metallic tang of ozone vanished. The cloying sweetness of roses dissipated. The room was still. The cheap landscape print was just a cheap landscape print. The beige carpet was just beige carpet. The Airbnb rural area, reviews don't match reality, was back to its mundane, artificial self. But I was not. I pressed a hand to my chest, over my heart. I thought of her, my wife, and tried to conjure her face, her laugh, the warmth of her hand. The images came, faint and distant, like old photographs seen through milky glass. I knew they were there. I knew they were her. But the vibrant, visceral connection, the sharp stab of grief, the overwhelming surge of love, they were muted, dulled, as if a vital cord had been cut. I had given it something. I had severed the link, sacrificed the raw emotional energy that fueled it. The corail of echoes had recoiled, banished for now. But what had I become in the process? What remained of the man who had loved and grieved so deeply? And could such a profound emptiness ever truly be filled again? I pushed. I pushed with everything I had left, a desperate, guttural heave of my very soul. That ember in my chest, the constant ache of her absence, it flared. It became a blinding, scalding sun, not just pain, but a fierce, protective fire. It was the absolute, unyielding truth of what I had lost, what I was. This wasn't a weapon forged from anger, but from an unbearable, pure love. The swirling chaos around me shrieked. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but something that vibrated through my bones, scraping against the inside of my skull. The fragmented faces, the echoing whispers, the impassable geometries that had tried to tear my mind apart, they recoiled. They writhed, like tendrils of smoke caught in an updraft, trying to hold their shape, trying to pull back, but something was breaking their hold. My vision swam, not with the entity's distortion, but with the effort, the sheer agonizing force of my will. A pressure built behind my eyes, a frantic thrumming in my temples. Then, a tearing sound like wet paper ripping, not in the air, but in the very fabric of my perception. The oppressive weight lifted, not slowly, but with a sudden, violent snap. The air, thick and viscous moments before, thinned. It tasted of dust and something metallic, like old pennies. I slumped, my knees giving out, my hands scraping against the gritty floorboards. The manor was silent. The kind of quiet that follows a storm, leaving behind only the dripping eaves and the distant rumble of retreating thunder. My body ached. Every muscle felt like it had been stretched and torn, then crudely reknitted. My head pounded, a dull, persistent throb behind my left eye. I opened my eyes slowly, blinking against the muted light filtering through the grimy windows. The room was still, the furniture undisturbed, the air motionless. Had it worked? Had I truly driven it back? I lay there for a long time, listening. The house breathed around me, the creak of settling timbers, the faint rush of wind outside. It felt different now, empty, like a shell from which something vital had been meticulously extracted. I pushed myself up, my limbs protesting with dull aches. My hands trembled. The air no longer felt charged with a malevolent presence, but it also felt thin. The portraits on the walls, once seeming to glare with accusation, now looked like mere paint on canvas, their eyes lifeless. It felt solid, real, unyielding. But the emptiness wasn't just in the house. It was in me. It was still there, but muted, distanced, as if the act of pushing it outward had somehow thinned its connection to me. I felt lighter, but not in a good way, like a balloon that had lost some of its air, still aloft, but with less buoyancy, less purpose. I left the manor without looking back. I simply walked out the front door, leaving it ajar, and kept walking until I reached my car. The engine started with a familiar grumble, a comforting sound of the mundane world. I drove away, not knowing where I was going, just knowing I had to be away. The roads were clear. The fields stretched out, green and ordinary under a pale sky. I found myself in a small town, miles from the manor, renting a place I found online. An Airbnb rural area. Reviews don't match reality. The pictures had shown a quaint cottage, sun-drenched and cozy, with promises of peaceful solitude and uninterrupted quiet. The reality was less charming. The cottage was smaller, dimmer than the photo suggested. A persistent smell of damp earth clung to the faded wallpaper. The uninterrupted quiet was punctuated by the rhythmic drip of a leaky faucet in the kitchen and the distant, mournful howl of what sounded like a lonely dog. The mattress was lumpy, the pillows thin. I read the reviews again on my phone, scrolling through the glowing 5-star ratings. A perfect escape, one read. So tranquil, I could almost hear my own thoughts. Another claimed. I frowned. My own thoughts felt distant, muffled, like they were happening to someone else. Days blurred into a monotonous rhythm. I ate, I slept, I stared out the window at the endless fields, a kind of mental fatigue. I found myself humming tunes I didn't recognize, melodies that felt ancient and wrong. Sometimes I'd catch myself staring at my reflection, a stranger looking back. One evening, as I was trying to read, a word on the page seemed to shimmer, just for a second, then another. Then entire sentences began to rearrange themselves, not in print, but in my mind. They formed new meanings, unsettling associations. I closed the book, my breath catching. It wasn't the book, it was me. I started to notice things in the Airbnb. The faint, almost imperceptible hum that sometimes filled the air, a vibration in the bones, not a sound. The reviews, I reread them again. So tranquil, I could almost hear my own thoughts. What if those thoughts weren't entirely their own? What if the peaceful solitude was actually an invitation? It wasn't the manor. It wasn't the chorale of echoes. Not truly. That burning ember, the core of my grief, had been extinguished or, perhaps, consumed. When I pushed it out, what had I really done? Had I driven the entity away, or merely opened a door for it to step through into a new, more intimate space? The quiet of the cottage pressed in. The drip, drip, drip of the faucet, the distant howl. What had I become?